أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. So last session we covered certain topics and certain points, and then after the session, inshallah, you guys got a communication email about that particular session in which I tried to outline and give the key points basically that I wanted you guys to take, summarized in 3 passages. Along with that, you also received a PDF which talked about we basically had the slides in it. So instead of giving the PowerPoint form of the slides, I converted them to a PDF format and sent you the slides that we had covered so far. Of the passages, if we quickly go through the passages, you'll see that it actually summarizes the session quite nicely. So the main points of the previous session, just to bring our memory back from last week, right, they're summarized quite nicely in the passages. So make sure you go through that. The first one talked about the idea of basically how do we know that the hereafter exists, that it is a continuation of our aqaid. So if we believe in certain traits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, one of them is being just, then there's an argument that can be made from that which leads to the existence of the hereafter, as the first passage points out, right? Second passage talked about this idea of the relationship between this dunya and the hereafter. In this particular one, in the class, we mentioned things like this particular dunya is limited in the fact that this particular dunya has matter associated with it and material associated with it. So aside from the immaterial, it also has a material aspect to it too. So aside from just having shape, it has a form. It has a material that goes along with that particular shape as well, right? Then there are other differences which we talked about, and that led us to get a better understanding of the verse presented in passage number 2, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in that particular verse that if you are going after the tillage of the dunya, then you'll get a portion of it, right? And we explained that getting the portion of it isn't because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want to give us all that He can give us. Rather, it's that this dunya in its essence has this limitation within it. That is, and I gave the example that if I gulp a drink of that particular water bottle that I was drinking the other day, right, then that particular water is now associated with my person. You can't have the same thing that I have. The material world is limiting in this particular manner, right? So if I become, let's say, prime minister or president of a particular committee, whilst I hold that particular position or that particular situation or that particular power or status or the case may be, other than me doesn't hold that exact same position, that exact same power in that particular manner. The material world is limited, right? This dunya is limited. But if someone was to hope for the tillage of the hereafter, where basically they are hoping to gain from the hereafter, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that we will increase them in their tillage, right? We will increase for them basically what they get back is going to be much more than basically what they were expecting, what they did, the irada of yurid. And we talked about this idea that this yurid doesn't necessarily like to go after something wasn't just necessarily wanting it without striving for it. Rather, the word used in this particular verse, if you will go to passage number 2, you'll see, was a striving, something that you had to actually go forth and act on and be very vigilant towards and kind of care for and so on and so forth. So it was something that was very much not passive. It was very much an active progression or active pursuit of that particular thing. So if you're actively pursuing the dunya, then you only get a part of it. But if you're actively pursuing the hereafter, you'll get much more than that. I'd like to request that if everybody can just have their cameras off and mic muted. Whenever you have a question, just unmute the mic and ask the question, inshallah. Right. So that was the second passage, and then we continued forth and we talked about basically what does it mean that we have our are deeds recorded, and what is this recording of the deeds? What does it look like in actuality, right? And we discussed that in fact it's by means of actions. We give the example of bravery. You said that I'm displaying bravery once, displaying bravery twice, three times, so on and so forth. I display instances of bravery, and then with each display, I implement a significant shadow or significant effect on my soul, right? Such that slowly I become brave, right? So I displayed an instance of a particular action, another instance of a particular action, so on and so forth. And with each display of that instance, we gave the example of the Microsoft Paint tool. Remember that? When you hold on to that particular button, the 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 spray tool in Microsoft Paint, right? Each time as you hold on to that particular button, you keep clicking, it kind of intensifies and intensifies and intensifies, right? And then slowly progresses toward a solid color, basically, right? In that particular application. Well, the relationship between our actions and our soul is similar in that regard. So when I display a certain action and display a certain action, I'm slowly imprinting onto my soul a specific trait, right? And then as I'm solidifying that trait into my soul, the more I perform that particular action, the more it becomes part of my soul. And section 3 talked about the fact that the passage 3, sorry, from your reading talked about that the fact that if you've imprinted a particular trait onto your soul and you made it a malakeh, and talked about what a malakeh was last session, right? Then now this particular thing is bound to your soul. Existentially, it's part and parcel with your soul, right? And as such, now that it's part and parcel with your soul, right? Because your soul is a timeless entity, it's not something that is bound by just the material realm, right? This particular trait, when it existentially links to your soul, then this is something that remains with you, right? So these were the components and the main points from last session that I definitely want you to hold on to and keep fresh in your mind. And that's why we spent a few minutes going over them. So we've talked about basically now certain preliminaries, and we get to the first stage now in our discussion about ma'ad, right? We've talked about some preliminaries, some introductions, and so on and so forth. And now we're at the first stage of this particular journey, and the first stage is the stage of ihtidar, right? It's also called sakarat al-maut or ghamarat al-maut, in the sense, meaning that it's the time of death, basically. It's when it's a point of transference from the material world, right, to the alam of barzakh, or to the realm after the material world. Okay, so today we hope to cover that. We hope to cover the points about ihtidar, as well as what does barzakh mean, all the way up until qiyamah. We want to talk about these particular two very heavy topics today, and get through these two heavy topics, inshallah. And in the last session, we'll culminate with certain points about the qiyamah and some of the points that I wanted to mention. So in this particular point, where a person is now at the stage where they've performed actions in their life, they've performed deeds, and each deed has a specific form and a specific shape associated with it, as we mentioned last time, right? And in this particular world, that particular action could only display one specific shape. For example, if I was to display the love I have towards my spouse, right? In that instance that I want to display that particular love towards my spouse, it comes out as me giving a flower to them, for example, right? And then a display in an action like this, continuous display in this particular thing, creates in me a malakeh of being a loving spouse, right? And then that's backed up by these small instances of actual actions that have caused this malakeh to become part and parcel of my soul, just like how we give the example of bravery. Right? So this is happening. This person's life is coming near an end, and all of his actions have left some form of an imprint on his particular soul, right? And now it's time for him to take the next step, which is basically a movement from the physical realm onto a realm higher than the physical realm, right? So it's this death in certain cultures, in certain understandings, in certain religions, is seen as an end point or a bad thing, right? And common man, because they're unfamiliar with this concept, and because death is something that is basically the unknown, the man is scared of that which he doesn't know, right? So then in common culture, death is seen as a taboo topic. It's not something you want to talk about. It's not something you want to be, you don't like the mention of. It's not something that you would like to, it's not something that's very embraced by culture, right? And society, and it's looked at as a very dark thing, right? Um, However, in Islamic worldview, death is not that, right? Death is merely a transition from one state and one manner of being to another, right? So in that sense, death is very similar to birth, right? Because in birth, we're transitioning from one realm, from the realm of the womb, out into the realm of the parent world, where we are right now, where this meeting is taking place, right? Similarly, death is another transitioning point, and it's seen as it. So similarly, so if let's say we had a fetus coming into the dunya, a child coming into the dunya, but the child was coming, uh, uh, prematurely, wasn't ready for this particular dunya. The lungs, let's say, hadn't developed, and so on and so forth. And now that transference is taking place. Well, similar to, that transference itself is not bad. What's bad is that transference is happening whilst the child is not prepared, right? So then in that particular instance, for that particular child, that transfer from the womb to the parent world becomes an issue now. It's a bad thing. It's seen as a bad thing. It's not something that we want. Why? Because of the ill preparedness of that particular child biologically for this particular world, right? So in that specific case, that death becomes something that is, or that birth becomes something that is looked, it's not ideal, right? But let's say now a child is full term, and now the child wants to come to the dunya, and everything biologically is in place. Then that birth, that transference from the womb to the apparent world is a good thing, right? And everything is in check, and we're happy about that, and so on and so forth. So death should be seen in a very similar manner. So this idea of ihtidar or sakarat al-maut or ramarat al-maut is basically a transference from the parent world into the hereafter, right? Into the year after this particular world, right? And that itself has certain parts to it, that's fine. But it's that point of transference. Similar to how we mentioned for the child, if somebody had this transfer occur while they were prepared for this transfer, right? From this particular dunya to the next, right? And this transfer becomes one which is easy and doesn't have problems for the person. Rather, it's something that is that very natural progression of his existence, really, right? But if this transference was something that a person wasn't prepared for, right? Then based on how ill prepared they were, that's how difficult this particular process and the process afterwards will be, right? So the difficulty in terms of this particular transference is not in the transfer itself. It's rather in the capacity that the person who is transferring from this apparent world to the hereafter, in terms of how prepared they are for this particular transference. Okay. So in this particular dunya, we talked about this concept. We said that when you perform an action, right, and you use your intellect to balance between your faculties of shahwat and ghadab, right, the desire and anger faculty, and try to maintain the midpoint between these two particular extremes. So each faculty has its own max and min. So each faculty has its own, extreme on one end or the other extreme on the other end. And each faculty has its own midpoint. And we talked about this midpoint being kind of like a center of a sphere rather than the center of a single line, because there's multiple dimensions to every situation that we have to consider, right? So, and then the more dimensions there are, and the more dimensions that I can, consider, the more significant and the more difficult that balance might be as well. That's a different issue, but that exists. Okay, that point is a true point. So So in this particular, when we were going through this particular dunya, we were trying to balance our faculty of desire and faculty of anger, and try to stay within the midpoint of it, right? By using our intellect, right? So when we're about to pass away, and this linkage that we have with this material realm, right, starts to weaken, and our soul weakens its connection with this particular dunya, right, then it starts to see certain realities and experience certain realities beyond this particular dunya, right? So once it starts to see or experience the concealed part of the material world, it starts to see the realities of the material world, right? It no longer is solely driven by its intellect to choose between balancing its faculties, right? In that stage, when it sees certain realities, right, then it's more, and then he's more likely, this particular person is more likely to sway towards now a particular belief system, and we see that. So as an example, let me just open up my notes on the second monitor. So we have in Surah Yunus, verse number 90, right? So this is a story of when Bani Israel had crossed the Prophet Musa had parted the seas, and then Bani Israel had crossed, and then Pharaoh and his armies had now entered this particular sea. Remember, the Pharaoh and his armies, these guys, they hate the believers of that particular time. They don't like the Holy Prophet, and they definitely aren't going to hug them. They're going after them, to basically annihilate them, right? So when the believers in that time of Nabi Musa left the water, right, and Fir'aun and his people were caught in the middle, what happens? Well, the Red Sea comes together, and when it comes together, right, over there, Fir'aun says something very interesting, right? He says, I believe, right? He says, I believe, and in that particular moment, this belief for him, whilst he's drowning, whilst he no longer has that capacity to make that decision based on his intellect solely, right? It's assisted with other things. This is the time of his ihtidar, really, right? When he sees certain spiritual realities manifest themselves as the relationship between his soul and his body is leaving, the decision he makes then in that particular moment doesn't benefit him much. Right? So as homework, inshallah, if you have a capacity for optional homework, please look at verse number 90 and verse number 91 of Surah Yunus, and see how Fir'aun speaks and what he says, and then consider how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replies to him as well, right? So certain people, while they're within this dunya, if they have maintained the faculty. Can you guys still hear me? Can you guys, am I still? I got a message saying that I've been signed out. No, I don't think I have been. Okay, I'll continue until someone says something. Hopefully nothing has happened. So whilst in this dunya, if someone had the capacity of maintaining the balance in his faculties, right, between shahwat and ghadab and so on and so forth, right, then whilst in this dunya, he might gain some capacities to view a more concealed portion of the material world, right? And at a very lower level, we experience that, right? Certain people, when they become proficient at certain traits, are able to see certain things that others might not be able to. For example, a car mechanic who's extremely proficient at finding out what's wrong with the car, by hearing the sound of the car's engine, can say, okay, I think this is what the issue is, and so on and so forth, right? In a very similar manner, why? Because he's developed that car mechanic by continual relationship with that particular car and fixing cars and experiencing different scenarios where certain sounds were heard and so on and so forth while a problem occurred, has developed a malakeh, has developed the attribute within himself such that now he can pick up on the nuanced differences in sounds and so on and so forth, and now make a very good educated guess on what might be the issue, right? In a very similar manner, when a person comes to basically hone his own existence by maintaining balance in a lot of his faculties consistently, day in and day out, right? Following the Sharia day in and day out. And when I say Sharia, I don't just mean praying on time and fasting. I mean the all aspects of the Sharia, how they're dealing with their spouse, how they're dealing with their kids, how they're spending their time, how they're attentive towards every waking hour of their day. So this consistent awareness of their 24 hours and living the deen really in the 24 hours, sometimes for certain people might create that same mechanism that the mechanic had, where they pick up on nuanced things, right? And they're able to make a very good educated guess based on those things that they've picked up. And it's not a sense that develops in the mechanic overnight, right? It's not like one night he goes to sleep and he wakes up and all of a sudden now he can, hear sounds of the car and tell you what's wrong with the car, if it's a motor or it's a timing belt, if there's whatever. No, so that's not the case, right? In a similar manner, for a person who starts to develop this purity of their nafs, it's not the case that he goes to sleep and one day wakes up and all of a sudden now purity of the nafs is there and now I can pick up on these neon things. No. It's more of a consistent and gradual uh, uh, compilation or acquirance of this particular trait within his body and his soul, really, right? And in this particular manner, he might be able to uh, see certain nuanced realities, just like that mechanic can sometimes pick up on certain problems of a particular car, let's say, by the sound that that particular car might make, right? So the story that many of us have probably heard of, I wanted to say that story now to kind of give a better explanation of what that scholar went through, as well as what the deceased was going through, and so on and so forth. Perhaps we can get a better understanding of that particular story now that we've got the packaging from the last session and the contents of this particular point that I just made so far. The story goes that a person was being buried, and the scholar saw that this person was laid into the grave. And then after a while, basically, a beautiful man comes and he enters the grave. And then so sometime after, a dog comes and enters the grave. And then that beautiful man and the dog start fighting. And then the beautiful man leaves the grave. And then the scholar or the pious person asks the man what just happened. And the person says that, well, both me and that dog were this person who was buried actions, right? And then this particular, for this particular person, his bad deeds were significant enough to overpower me, his good deeds. And now with him, that which is left is that which he basically harvests. He harvests that which he sowed, basically. The dog remains with him in the grave, and so on and so forth. So on the aspect of the pious person, the scholar, so on and so forth, to be able to visit the graveyard and view such a reality, right? Now we know why that was possible on his part, right? It wasn't like an overnight development of a particular trait. It was like that development of that nuanced sound that a mechanic can develop sometimes, right? Keep that example in mind, because it's not a one-time decision the scholar made that all of a sudden, bells and whistles started ringing for him and he could see the realities of dunya. More, it was like the building of that particular trait of realizing the nuanced changes in the appearance, right? And that developed a particular trait with him such that he was able to see this one particular instance for this one particular person in this one particular time. Okay. For the person as well who passed away, we see that, well, we talked about this idea that certain realities have multiple shapes to them, right? Every action that I commit has a shape associated with it. So over there, certain shapes manifested themselves. His good actions manifested themselves in a good-looking person, right? Whilst like a beautiful person. Whilst his bad actions manifested themselves in the shape of a dog, right? And now basically the compilation of these multiple shapes was shown in this particular manner, where one particular aspect overcame and overshadowed the other particular aspect, right? So this hopefully after going through the particular session and the session after, you get a better understanding of a story like that means. It's not just a beautiful person and a dog and that's it and so on and so forth. Rather, there's a much more background to that. right? So one question hopefully we've answered so far is that why is it that when you're about to pass away, it's now the time of forgiveness has come to a close, basically. Right? In the time and in the example of Fir'aun that was given in Surah Yunus as your guys' homework, well, this guy, once basically you are no longer making a particular decision based on only your intellect, you have other factors there. For example, you might have seen a certain reality or a certain aspect of the hereafter, which might nudge you towards, controlling your shahwat or ghadab and so on and so forth, right? Well, that's too late because Allah wants us to make a decision and cause that particular growth within our soul, right? And once we're not making that decision out of our own free will, or making that decision just to save myself, I'm not in fact imprinting a significant change onto my soul. So it's not that the doors of forgiveness have been closed whilst they could have been opened. It's more like the opportunity to gain a specific trait and to cause a specific imprint onto the soul has come to an end. Why? Because certain information and certain realities have now been made visible to us, have now been given in our ikhtiyar, in our capacity, that prevent us from making a decision based on just intellect. And this prevents us from making a decision that's wholly from free will. Right? There's an external factor that has now come in. Okay. So when a person passes away at the time of ihtidar, right, they see the angel of death, right? Now, this angel of death or helper of the angel of death, right? They are not necessarily bad entities. They're very beautiful. They're creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? In their essence, they're beautiful. But then we have in riwayat and our hadith talks about this idea that some people see the angel to be beautiful and nice and smiling, and others see them to be not so beautiful, not so happy, not so smiling and loving and so on and so forth. Rather very they see an aspect of wrath with the particular angel and so on and so forth. Well, the manifestation of a person's actions creates for him a specific lens, right? And what happens is when this particular lens is created, a person sees based on that particular lens. So if I manifested good actions in my life, then I'm granted the lens to view the angels how they are. They're beautiful creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And that visage, that seeing of the angels becomes a manifestation of Allah's beauty, really, right? But then there are times when I've committed mistakes and I've committed sins and I haven't regretted and I haven't gone back and done jabran, which means to go back and fix the issue. And I haven't requested for forgiveness from whoever I've made mistakes to, and so on and so forth, right? What happens then is that I've solidified for my soul a specific lens now. So what I do is when I see these angels, I see them through this murky lens. And for me, these angels, they become extremely scary, right? And I see the manifestation of the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, rather than the jamal of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So at the time of ihtidar, a person sees 5 types of things. This is an important point that I want to mention here. The first thing that a person sees, he witnesses his own place in the barzakh. Right? He witnesses, generally speaking, the direction that he's going to go. And it's not that he witnesses something external to him. I gave this example last time. If I told you that like I'm gonna go work out for 3 months, and after the 3 months, you just have to hold up a mirror really for me to see if I've worked out in the past 3 months or not, right? You don't necessarily have to come and tell me if a time you worked out or didn't work out. If I just binge ate pizza and ice cream and so on and so forth and all sorts of garbage and spent little to no time in the gym, by holding up that mirror, all you're showing me is you're showing me my own existence, right? You show me that, hey, I've become obese. And then that in of itself is now notifying me that what? That, well, I'm not headed in the right direction. I'm going in the wrong direction, right? Whilst if I spend regular time at the gym and consistently perform the specific actions and with proper guidance and so on and so forth, and right and lifted weights and progressively increased the weights I was lifting and also maintained my diet and so on and so forth, right? In this particular example, the lifting of the weights and so on and so forth is our wajib or mustahab act in the diet and preventing, even eating unhealthy food is like refraining from sins, basically, right? So you could have positive and good actions, and you could be doing them, but if you're not supplementing with proper diet, you're not going to get much results. It's not going to happen. There's a very similar relationship between these two. Side point. So if uh, uh, if I was doing the right things in terms of the exercise in the gym and the food that I was eating, right? Then all you had to do was hold up a mirror in front of me. When you held up that particular mirror in front of me, I saw basically the beautification of my body, my physical self, right? And then in that sense, I was seeing that I was going in the right direction. So in this is what it means that you will witness your own place in barzakh. It's not that you will witness a place that exists, and it's separate from you, and there's place and time happening in barzakh. No, no. It's more that you will come to realize your own existence. Okay, and that existence might be a heavenly existence, or that existence might be an existence that's not so heavenly, right? You also see the angel of death and other angels, and I've explained this particular point already, that how you see them depends on the type of lens you place for yourself, right? You can have a clear lens which allows you to see reality, right? Or you could place a non-clear lens which allows you to see basically only certain aspects of the angel, which is the aspects of which are extremely scary and have wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala manifested within them, right? But in both cases, you're still using that particular lens because an angel is not an entity which necessarily has specific form. Certain angels transcend form, right? To be able to see them, to see these particular malak, they do tamathul for us. So they come down from a realm that is higher than that of form to a level that is having form. So example of that is in Surah Maryam when Hazrat Jibreel comes into the figure of a beautiful person towards her, right? Uh, it says that the verse of the Quran says فَتَمَثَّلَ لَهَا, right? He comes in, he becomes manifest for her, meaning she is a receptor who basically pulls him down, his entity, his existence, which exists in the metaphysical form. Uh, it becomes manifest in a mithali form where he comes as a beautiful person, for example, for Hazrat Maryam. Right? فَتَمَثَّلَ لَهَا. Another side point. So the second thing that people see is the angel of death, the other angels, and so on and so forth. And these angels and these realities manifest themselves in accordance to the lens that you've placed upon yourself in your existential self. Right? The third thing that people see are the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam. Right? Now, again, the manifestation of the Ahl Bayt, meaning if I'm somebody who's a believer in Imam Ali and Imam Hussein, I acted and I lived my day-to-day, my 24 according to the deen, then I see Ahl Bayt who are pleased with me, and I see them as how they are, the manifestations of beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And then if I've not done that, if I haven't prepared my soul and if I haven't engraved within my soul certain realities, right? Or I've engraved the incorrect traits within my soul, right? By performing bad actions, I've made my soul now murky, right? Then that which I'm privy to is that I see the Ahl Bayt, but they're not happy with me, right? To see Imam Ali, who I claim to love so much in this dunya, when I pass away, to see him as somebody who's not happy with me, must be very difficult for somebody who claimed to love him, right? So it's extremely important that within our 24 hours we try to live our deen, right? Attentively focus on our actions such that our actions are things that lead to an existential imprint onto our soul, cleaning our soul. So the other thing we see, the fourth item, so now we witness our own place, which I explained what that means. We witness the angel of death and others and other angels. I explained what that means. We see the Ahlul Bayt and the different aspects how we see Ahlul Bayt. I've explained that as well to some degree. Right? We see the presence of shayateen. That's the fourth point. Okay. Shayateen come to us because this is now the final moment, right? As the relationship between the soul and the body weakens, right? They're kind of as we're approaching that particular inqita, that particular separation of the body and the soul, right? They're kind of here for the last ditch effort, basically. The same, it's in a very similar manner, basically. Um, how the Ahlul Bayt when they've told us about is that when you're passing away, recite certain azkar, have your feet towards the qibla in the time of ihtidar. There are certain adab that relate to this moment of passing. And one common aspect in all of these moments, in these etiquettes of a person who's passing, is that you're asked to continually remind yourself of your deen, of your fundamental faith and your fundamental belief, and remind yourself of basically your responsibilities, and feel regretful towards basically actions that you have done that weren't necessarily in line with that. So you hold yourself true to your deen, basically. So you're supposed to recite La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, for example. So in the time of ihtidar, you're asked to do these actions where your feet are facing the qibla, such that if you were to sit up, you'll be facing the qibla itself, right? And so on and so forth. So you're asked to be taken to a place in your household where you used to pray, so a prayer area in your household, right? If you have family who are around who witnessed you in this time of ihtidar, you're asked to be in that particular area that has blessing to it. So as you can see, these different etiquettes all revolve around this idea of creating more awareness in the person passing from this realm to the next, that he is somebody who has faith in Allah and the Ahlul Bayt and so on and so forth. Why? Because the shayateen come at that particular time too, and they come in not in forms of like you don't see like little demons and devils and so on and so forth. That's not what I'm talking about. The shayateen come in the form of trying to make you regret about your belief, right? So they might come in the form of this significant regret that you weren't able to, let's say the palace that you built, you weren't able to enjoy it. That spouse that you had, you weren't able to spend more time with. That love that you had with your children, you weren't able to spend more time with, and so on and so forth. And they come in a very interesting manner. They want you to associate this cutting to Allah, such that they almost want you to regret and dislike now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for causing this particular separation between you and your loved things and loved ones and so on and so forth. Okay, so this particular type of feeling that occurs. So there's a story that was narrated in the book of Āyatullāh Mujtaba Tehrani. He says that basically, I saw one of my friends passing away, and at the time of passing away, he was saying very bad things. He was saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done dhulm on him, such that no one else has done that dhulm on him. And he was saying things that I have small kids who need a guardian, who need a caretaker, right? And Allah is at this point taking my life from me, and so on and so forth. Whilst forgetting that, so this person who's making these claims, who's saying these things at the time of ihtidar, right? He's under the influence of this particular emotions and feelings of regret, and that's spurred on and caused by the shayateen that visit him at the time of departure as well, right? If he's a firm believer who engraved within his existence dependence, and who engraved within his existence the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and proper understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at that time when such feelings occur within him and shayateen are coming to cause trouble for him, he can very easily from his existence yell out and say that no, it's not the case. It was never me who took care of these kids, and it was never me who was their guardian. Rather, I was only a caretaker, right? I was only a dependent being. The all independent is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was their Rabb, the Rabb of my children, the same way He was my Rabb, right? And it was in fact Him who upraised them and gave them existence and brought them to this point, right? And my death too is part and parcel of my children's growth. And in fact, that itself is also being given uh, from the Rabb of the Alameen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? But when can a person existentially come up with this particular realization? Well, when they have cleansed and imprinted such a realization on their soul. And how does a person implement and imprint such a realization and such a reality to their soul? Well, when they have constantly dedicated such a reality, such an understanding in the 24 hours. So, uh, living your deen in the 24 hours and making sure you implement this particular deen in 24 hours, it's like, uh, it's causing that imprint of this particular realization and ma'rifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your soul, right? This is like this particular living your deen. It's like swimming. Yeah, it's like a skill that you learn. You progressively, slowly hone that particular skill throughout your life, and you've been given a whole lifetime to do that. Right? You start off with your understanding of your deen, and you've been given a lifetime now to progressively manifest this belief of yours within your 24 hours and live your deen attentively, right? Such that now at the time of sakarat al-maut or ghamarat al-maut or ihtidar, right? The time where basically people who aren't prepared, it's trouble for them, right? You're prepared. Your existence in of itself drives away the shayateen and tells them, listen, in my existence such a belief exists. Those 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 negative thoughts, either they'll come and then your existence will respond to them, or if you're at an even higher station, right, those negative thoughts might not even be able to come near you, right? Because existentially, you're basically light, where you're preventing that darkness of that particular thought to come near you, right? Again, it depends on how strongly you've manifested your deen in your 24 hours. That's why it's important for a person to try and increase their attentiveness in their 24 hours in terms of their dependence and their absolute dependence towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Living my deen such that when I'm taking part in my day-to-day affairs, my income, my kids, and so on and so forth, it could be very easy to be negligent of the fact that I'm dependent on Allah while I'm performing those actions, right? But by trying to become attentive towards my dependence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while I'm performing those actions, right? I am now creating within me this particular trait slowly, the ma'rifat of Allah, and every instance that I have attention towards Him and attentive towards His ayat, that I'm entirely dependent on Him, right? Is one instance of displaying my deen in my 24 hours and so on and so forth, until it comes to a point where it becomes part and parcel of my soul, right? And once that happens, things become easier for me at the time of ihtibar. The fifth thing a person sees is the manifestation of his children, his assets, and his mal. There's a very beautiful hadith that basically Imam Ali alayhi salam says that when Bani Adam, when the son of Adam dies, right, what happens is that three things manifest for him. His children are manifested for him, his assets, that his wealth is manifested for him, and his a'mal are manifested for him. Right? He asks his wealth. He says, I clenched onto you in my dunya, and I strive to acquire you in this dunya. Right? What can you do for me today? Now that I'm passing away, what can you do for me? And the wealth comes and says, from me, you can go buy a kafan. So I'm at this point, the maximum health I'm going to give you is that I'm going to provide for you a kafan, a shroud. Okay. Then this man turns to his children. He says, what can you do for me? Because I strive in your path to make sure that basically I loved you, and I tried to make sure that I was muhamiyan. I was somebody who was assisting you and helping you, right? I was somebody who was looking out for you, right? What can you do for me today? and the manifestation of his children comes back to him and says that what you can take from us today is that we'll carry you to your grave and we'll bury you in your grave. Okay. And then man turns to his actions basically and says, well, what can you do for me today? Right. And the manifestation of this man's actions, remember the beautiful man and the dog, right? The manifestations of his actions says that I will be near you in your grave and on the day of judgment till you're brought before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right. So at the end of the day, that which he got from his wealth was his kafan, his shroud. That which he got from his kids was this bringing him to his grave and the burial itself, right? But that which gave him, that which basically gave him the most ease and the most worry, depending on how that particular thing manifested, was his actions, right? So an attentiveness of an actions is not, it's not just something that exists in one aspect of our life, right? Our actions is our 24 hours, right? So by being more attentive towards our 24 hours, by trying to live our deen according to the basically by living our deen in the 24 hours, right? We are now trying to make that manifestation of our actions the most pure and the most best of companions, basically. Our 24 hours has to have within it the answer to our existential need, like physical need. It has to have sleep in it, appropriate sleep. It has to have appropriate eating habits. It has to have appropriate exercise within my 24 hours, right? And this is one of the rights of my body that I have on myself. If I don't have these three aspects in my 24 hours, it's not just that I've lost out in the dunya. No, I've lost out in the hereafter as well, because the manifestation of my actions will be lacking as well. When my actions manifest, if I didn't take care of this blessing of the human body, right, then that is a negative manifestation of that action will be manifested negatively. That deprivation of the physical body will be manifested negatively for me at the time of ihtidar, right? Similarly, I have to have time for earning, and I have to have time for intellectual growth in my 24 hours, right? And if I don't have that, right, then again, I'm going to be manifesting that negligence in that particular capacity when in the time of ihtidar, and so on and so forth. There's a topic, inshāAllah, I will post certain, there will be a second passage I'll post about a balanced lifestyle, which will give just certain topics that we should try to maintain within our 24 hours and why. But that's part of the secondary homework for today, inshallah. Let's see how much we're doing for time. We're quite short on time. Which leads us to the next portion. Alhamdulillah, a lot of the major understandings of what it means to be going through this idea of ihtidar and what does it existentially mean to transfer from this particular point of the dunya to the hereafter. We've talked about some of those really key points of the skills lesson. Just make sure there's nothing else left for okay. Next point leads us to this the talk of barzakh. We've covered this idea of ihtidar basically, right? And in ihtidar, the point of passing from the dunya to the hereafter, right, really depends now on how you lived the dunya, and we understand now what this statement means. It existentially depends on how you manifested your deen in every action you committed, right? How attentive you were towards that. And again, we mentioned that it's like swimming. It's like a skill that you acquire, right? You start to slowly develop it, and you've been given your entire lifetime to develop it, right? And it's never too late to start, right? So barzakh now is now that point where basically, so first and foremost, if you look at Surah Mu'minun, verse number 99 and 100, I've underlined the word barzakh there. وَمِنْ وَرَائِهِمْ بَرْزَخٌ إِلَى يَوْمِ يُبْعَثُونَ. Right? So, and before them is a barrier until a day they will be resurrected. Right? That's the translation this particular translator decided to use. Um, so this barzakh is now this intermediary, this middle point now between passing away from this dunya, between this dunya, the material realm, and the and Yawm al-Qiyamah now, right? So this barzakh, uh, uh, so in this intermediary, in this middle ground, basically, um, the general direction is given to us of where we're going. As I said, that mirror is kind of held up, and I kind of see my own existence. Am I in the good or am I in the bad? Exactly how good I am and exactly how bad I am, and exactly the accountation of every explicit action is not happening here just now, right? And another key point here is that this is not something that exists with the same framework of time and space that we have now, right? This framework of understanding the zaman and makan that we have right now is innately linked to matter and the materialistic world, right? Where but in the metaphysical world, it's not the case. So certain laws which we hold very true in the physical world, right? They're not necessarily the same in the metaphysical world. And just to give a very small example, is, for example, if A is close to B in the physical world, then B is also close to A in the physical world, right? Right. But in the metaphysical world, right, it's not the case. So, for example, an example would be I could be Brother Ali's best friend, but this idea of love, and it transcends the apparent physical world, right? So I could be Brother Ali's best friend, but it doesn't necessarily. So I could be very close to him, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he is close to me. That he doesn't have to be my best friend, right? So this word close, right, in the physical world means the proximity of space of these two entities and so on and so forth, right? And it's measured with space and time and so on and so forth. But in the metaphysical world, this closeness holds a different value, different meaning altogether, such that it allows for this closeness to exist one directionally. Okay? And we use that in common lingo. Yeah, I'm his best friend, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's my best friend. Right? And so on. But just one example that certain realities that do exist in the physical realm, in the physical world, might not necessarily be the exact when it comes to the barzakhi existences and so on and so forth. Okay. So a barzakh is you're progressing towards now qiyamah, towards your eternal abode, but it's not necessarily you're not entirely at that stage yet. Existentially, there's still there's still certain aspects that are there that don't necessarily exist in qiyamah, and you've definitely grown from your material dunyavi existence, but you haven't transcended all the way to your eternal existence yet. You're in this kind of in between, if you will, right? Barzakh. So um, uh, here, your actions do manifest themselves in certain ways, right? But there's no matter, but there is shape, there is color, there is taste, as I mentioned in the slide over there. It's like a dream. It's not necessarily a dream. It's much more intense. It is more intense than the reality we experience now. But this when I say it's like a dream over there, I mean to say that it's not physical. And so, for example, in your dream, you have shape, color, taste. You can travel from here to, let's say, Najaf, and Najaf to Karbala, and Karbala back to here where you're sitting in your dream, right? And it doesn't take any time at all, right? You don't have to take an airplane. Right? You kind of just travel, and you're not bound by space or time in that particular manner. When you go to sleep, in the real world, you might have slept for only, like, let's say 20 minutes, but in your sleep, you might have gone through an entire, you've lived through, like, certain aspects which definitely were more than 20 minutes, right? Sometimes less than 20 minutes and so on and so forth, but they were so detailed that, in a 20-minute snap, this is the dream that you had. So this is what I mean, that the realities of that existence is similar, but not the exact same as this apparent world. when it comes time for the questioning in barzakh, the questioning starts from the first day that you're laid into the grave, right? So that the first day that you're experiencing now, the barzakh, ihtizar has finished. Ihtizar was the time you were dying. Right now you've been taken and put into the grave, right? And the questioning started. Now the questioning is, as if you've seen so far, it's not like I'm talking to you and I ask you a question and you answer to me and so on and so forth. It's not a questioning of the 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 intellectual capacity. It's not that when I'm asking you questions, I'm not. You're not being tested on your intellectual capacity, right? It's not the case that basically Allah's trying to see that you have the right answers here or not, right? The questioning there is more like the lifting up of that particular mirror, right? It's that point of asking, okay, let's see what have you manifested so far. And you kind of lift up that particular mirror and when you're asked who's your Rabb, right? You could have memorized Allah, 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 and you could have done a whole tasbih of that your whole life, right? But unless you manifested your deen your 24 hours, right? Unless you manifested your deen your 24 hours, when that mirror is held up, right? Remember that guy who didn't work out too much and binge ate pizza? Well, he was still obese, you know. So when that mirror is lifted up, if I was going after the dunya and the only thing I cared about was the dunya and the thing that made me decide all my decisions was the dunya, if my hum and gham was the dunya, when I woke up, the first thing I did was I went on my phone and checked out, what's the latest news about, whatever stocks or this, or if I watched or just went on YouTube to see what the next basically time, spender thing is, or what next fad is, or next fashion is, or the next thing is, and I just kept going through these Insta scrolls and so on and so forth. If the first thing that comes to my capacity, to my mind, and my hum and gham is the dunya, right? Then when that mirror is held up and I'm asked, who's your Rabb? No matter how badly I want to say Allah, my existence will be screaming a different thing entirely. Right? It's like that guy in the gym, right? So no matter how badly he wants to say, yeah, I'm fit, I'm sorry, but when the mirror is held up and you've binge eaten pizza and all sorts of garbage and not gone to exercise in the past year, you're not fit. Okay. You can't existentially lie. You can't existentially trick the system. Why? Because that image that you see in the mirror is a manifestation of your actions that you did regularly, right? So the questioning in barzakh, it's not that you're asked a question and now you reply Allah and you're done. Rather, you're manifesting that which you did in this dunya. Exactly that. Oh, what's going on? Next, okay. So we are very close to where I want to be, but we haven't reached exactly there. So I'll try to pick up the pace a little bit. And let's say in 15 minutes, I'll open up the floor for questioning for the last 15 minutes. So in about 15 minutes, it'll be about 9:15, and the session is supposed to end at 9:30 sharp. I'm sorry about last session, and we went over a bit. So 9:15, inshallah, I'll stop where we reached, and we'll go towards basically question and answers for the last session, last 15 minutes, basically. Sorry. So the questioning in the barzakh is in line with basically the big picture things, right? So you're basically and are you basically who's your Rabb is one of the questions that's asked. How did you spend your youth is another question asked. How do you spend your life after asking about the youth is another question that is asked, right? And these questions aren't asked in the form of words and so on and so forth. Rather, these are certain realities that the Ahlu are saying that these realities will be highlighted in that particular moment for you, right? And you better be ready, because they've told us now at this stage, these realities are the ones that are going to be highlighted and looked upon, right? So if you want this barzakh stage to be a stage where you succeed in and you see the image and you manifest the image that you want to manifest, and you want to see the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this particular stage and not the wrath, then basically make sure you're ready for these particular things. So our intellect, again, we are asked to learn our aqaid and have proof of our aqaid by means of our intellect, right? Um, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the buck stops there. Rather, it has to now manifest, that aqaid now has to manifest in controlling my desire, right? And this creates now ikhlaq. So my nafsani traits, my existential traits that I'm creating for myself, right? As long as it's based on this uh, 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 aqaid, if it's as long as it's based on a true perception of reality, right? If it's based on tawheed, then that particular control of my desire manifests in a positive akhlaq, like nafsani, like good traits that causes a positive change within my soul, right? But if I was, let's say, not necessarily following through with my actions in the dunya, right? Without proper aqaid, I was just kind of habitually doing certain actions, right? Without necessarily considering or thinking about them too much, right? Then in those particular cases, I haven't necessarily, manifested certain nafsani traits in my body, in my person, in my soul. Right? Let me give you a better example of this. Last session, I gave the example of Bob and somebody else who's a believer coloring with their kids, with their daughter, I think it was, a horse. And in the apparent, both people were doing the same action. They were coloring the same horse, similar horse, on similar piece of paper, similar timings, and so on and so forth. But existentially, those two actions yielded in very different results, right? In a similar manner, today I'm going to give an example of etiquette, right? So we have somebody who, just the way they were raised in the environment they're from and so on and so forth, there are people who learn the etiquettes of, not lying and not doing bad things and not stealing and so on and so forth, right? But these actions of not lying and not stealing and not doing bad things and so on and so forth aren't necessarily connected to their aqaid, their belief system, right? They're more connected to how society trained them to behave, period, right? There's an existential difference between the person who doesn't lie, doesn't scam, doesn't cheat, doesn't do bad things, uh, whilst these things are existentially linked to this idea of belief in Allah. And in fact, he finds these actions to be honorable because they're the actions prescribed by Allah to the Ahlul Bayt. There is an existential difference between this person and somebody who, does the same actions on the apparent, apparently, right? And the apparent, the actions seem to be very similar, but when you lift the hood, they're not connected to the aqaid. They're not connected to he's not manifesting his deen, right? He's more like going through a habitual process that his society or his environment or others around him kind of driven him to, without the most important part, which is the connection of those actions to his aqaid, the connection of those actions that he's performing to his deen, right? He's not lying, but it's not because it's something that Allah likes us not to do. It's not driven from his belief in Tawheed. It's not driven from this idea that basically lying is something that is, a believer shouldn't do, right? Or for example, he might even come to a procession and say, "I'm not very happy with what's happening with, let's say, the zulm that's happening in this particular area or that particular area." Okay, but that procession, that particular activism that he's displaying, isn't a manifestation of his aqaid, isn't a manifestation of his principles. Rather, it's basically something that's very dependent and linked to his person, right? And if it's linked to his person and not linked to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? He's still leading that self-centric life, right? He's not leading an Allah-centric life. And the purpose of, so the key point, if anything we want to take away from today's session and yesterday's session combined, would be that the most important thing is to attentively follow and obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in my 24 hours, right? And do that which He wants me to do and refrain from that which He wants me to refrain from. Because in the time of barzakh, where it's put up in front of me, right, I will manifest that which I have existentially linked to him in a positive manner. And if there was no existential connection between my aqaid and my akhlaq and so on and so forth, or else I was following habitually certain actions, right? The imprint they might leave on my soul might not be the ones that I'm looking for, right? It's not to say that they will have no imprint. Clearly, somebody who has good etiquette in this world is different from somebody who neither has any aqaid nor has any good etiquette, right? But it might not be the imprint that I'm looking for. Remember, I'm going for, the closest proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Ahlul Bayt, being in heaven and so on and so forth. I'm not only trying to escape hellfire, right? It will be a great injustice that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided me with the best of prophets and the best of the imams and all these resources just so that I could escape hellfire. Right? Rather, it's the highest levels of purity and perfection that I'm supposed to be after. Right? This point is a very important point to consider and ponder upon. Right? That people in the time of Nabi Musa, Nabi Isa, so on and so forth, they were blessed with Nabi Musa, but they were not blessed with the Ahlul Bayt. They were not blessed with the Holy Prophet, right? It's like, let's say we were both in math class and it's a grade 3 math, right? So everybody got a grade 3 math teacher, right? I got like a PhD prof teaching me grade 3 math. Right? If at the end of the day, my only usage from this particular PhD prof was the exact same as the person who got the grade 3 math teacher, I mean, I think that guy learned 2 plus 2 is 4. I'm just making up a random. And I basically, my hum and gham, my entire existential strive was to learn 2 plus 2 is 4 only from this particular prof and nothing more. And right, like I've significantly shrunk the capacity in which I could have used this particular PhD prof. Right? The time of the ummah of the Holy Prophet and the deen of the Holy Prophet being the most complete deen and the best deen and the deen that allows us and opens the pathway for a person to manifest absolute proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It'd be quite a lowly manner of behavior if a person who has that potential kind of uses that potential only to escape hellfire. Right? It's like I give somebody a really nice laptop and they're using it as a tray, right? This doesn't fit well, basically, with that which you've been given. So our hope is to strive in our 24 hours and reach for the peak, right? Not just make sure we don't fall off the edge. Anyways, going forward, inshallah. Time first, a few minutes left. We talked generally about this idea of the intellect and how when a person wakes up and how they carry through with their day, how basically those actions will be manifesting themselves. I'll give you the main points from there. We talked about the fact that every trait will manifest itself, whether it's good or bad, and that that in that particular realm, there's not that one particular form will manifest, rather multiple forms will manifest, and so on and so forth. Right? And we talked about this gradational change, and basically, the more I perform a particular action, the more strongly linked that particular action with me would be with my soul. So the more I've performed a particular action, similarly, the manifestation of that particular good action will be dependent and in correlation with how existentially linked that good action has become with my soul, right? If it's become a malakeh of my soul, such that it's entirely linked with my soul, then it will remain forever, and it progresses into qiyamah, and so it becomes part and parcel of my soul, right? But if it's something that is manifested in a very lower manner, lower level, in the story of that dog and that beautiful man. Remember, the scholar was seeing that dog kind of bit and harassed that beautiful man in the grave, which was the person's good action. The good action kind of left. Well, if a person performed goodness, right? When he's now in barzakh and so on and so forth, that which remains with him is that which is imprinted into his soul, right? And he's definitely imprinted something into his soul. His soul is not devoid, it's not like it's empty. It's either manifested goodness in it or it's manifested badness in it. If that goodness, it tried to manifest but didn't reach the level of malakeh, right? Didn't become part and parcel with his person, right? Then it's like that man. It will try to defend him. It will try to kind of overcome that particular badness of his action. But at one point, the badness, which did penetrate and did become part and parcel of his soul, it will persevere, right? So as the layers of connection between the dunya and the here and this particular person's soul start to decrease and change and so on and so forth, right? That which remains with the soul is that which the soul manifested truthfully and existentially, right? So those traits that the soul was able to maintain with it, they remain. And there were certain stories, like the story of Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh, that I really wanted to share about basically such a person who, in the appearance, like the Holy Prophet basically led the funeral processions for him, buried him. According to narration, 70,000 angels had taken part in his funeral. Right, he's such a great personality, right? But when it came time for basically his burial and him being buried and so on and so forth, because he put pressure on his family and he wasn't somebody who dealt very positively with his spouse and his family, right? He felt a squeezing of the grave, and this squeezing wasn't that something external from him was being pushing into his person. No. We talked about the mirror example, right? He experienced that the actions that he committed in this particular dunya towards one aspect of his life, the aspect of his family, right, manifested themselves there, right? Whilst he had given so much in the path of Islam, he'd gone to wars, he in public was a very nice person, so on and so forth. But because of the pressure and constriction that he had placed on his family and the unnecessary difficulty he had placed on his family, right? He experienced that particular trait manifest itself, right? And then he experienced the fashar and the squeezing, as the narrations say, and that you guys have heard many times as well, right? So now, one particular point that I do want to talk about, we're close to the end. This is the last point I guess we'll talk about today, then we'll end this, then we'll go to questions and answers for the last 15 minutes. So when a person passes away, there's certain actions that this person performed, right? And those manifest, right? Then basically, so certain things I did, they manifest, and certain things I didn't do, they manifest, right? And then all of a sudden, I also in my certain other things might manifest too. And this is what I want to talk about right now, which is that, let's say I had a child in this dunya, and after I pass away, this child goes and starts to understand the deen and learns about the deen and follows the deen in his 24 hours, right? Because I was one of the causes which caused the bringing about of such a person in this dunya, right? And the tarbiyah of this particular person in this dunya, right? That action of mine has not necessarily ended in the dunya, right? That child is my action. He's the byproduct of my action. That tarbiyah, that care I took in terms of raising him and so on and so forth. So when that child is good, right? It's like a continuation of my action, right? It's like a continuation of my action, right? So similarly, that continuation at whatever level it's a continuation of my action continues to help me when I've passed away, because my actions were such in this dunya that they actually yielded in some sort of a continual effect, right? Now, let's say I'm somebody who creates in this dunya, I buy a piece of land, and in that particular land, I create something that will basically, in the middle of the night, create lots of noise and wake people up, and it causes, like, the mechanism I put in that particular land, and it continuously basically harasses people who live around there. Every night, 3 a.m., it just starts going, and let's say Fajr is like at 7, like 6. So like people are being woken up for no reason in the middle of their sleep. It's not even like a Fajr alarm. Okay, so and I pass away. I do this method and I pass away. My action, the effects of that, whilst that mechanism exists and causes an effect, right? Existentially, I'm still linked to that particular action, right? And then the negativities of that, I will manifest for me too, right? Although this is a time-bound action, the manifestation of that in my barzakh, I'll see them, right? That's a separate issue that we'll go into. So when we perform good deeds for people, when we perform, so let's say we go to the qabristan and we give sadaqah for the deceased, or we recite a particular surah for the deceased and so on and so forth. We're reciting it for them because they shared with us one action, right? They shared either their faith in Allah with us, if we're going to a qabristan of, let's say, Muslims, or they shared their iman in the Ahl Bayt with us, right? And that action, the action that connected them to us in terms of our faith and our aqaid is what caused me to, when I went to my qabristan, I recited Surah Fatiha, I recited because this person was a believer who passed away, correct? Okay. So at that level, they've still maintained a connection to me. And when I'm performing a particular action, it existentially has the capacity of now manifesting positively for them. Okay. Negative actions of this manner as well. Let's say that this person leaves behind a child and they did ill tarbiyat of that particular child. So it has to come back to their action, meaning something that they did which caused this particular child to become this particular. Let's say they habitually lied in front of a child, or they habitually did ghibat, backbiting in front of a child, such that it became part and parcel of that child, right? And once that person passes away and he was left behind now a child who has these two habitual sins within him, right? Because I created those habitual sins within this child, I basically, enforce those particular sins in my child's tarbiyah, unfortunately, right? As the child progresses and those sins develop, well, I'm part and parcel of those particular traits, right? And those mistakes will be manifested for me too. Okay? So it becomes extremely important, the connections and the repercussional actions that we leave behind in this dunya. This is why sadaqah jariyah, or leaving behind baqiyatul salihat, this is why these types of concepts are extremely important for us as Muslims, as believers. People who are, when they go into the barzakh, right? We want to see the positive manifestations of our akhirah, right? People who don't believe entirely, right, that action itself has a manifestation too, and they will not like the manifestation that it has. So this concludes the session for today. Inshallah, the next session will start from slide number 24, and we'll go forward right from this particular slide forth, inshallah. I'd like to open up the floor now to people who have questions for the last, let's say, 10, 12 minutes, and I'll end the session at 9:30. Does anybody have any questions regarding any of the concepts we talked about so far? If you do, just unmute your mic and ask. I don't know how to manage the.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you for this. It's been very interesting.
Alhamdulillah.
And I have a question, but it did not make any sense. Anyways, so okay, so there is no matter. So once the person is buried, that body becomes bones and dust, correct?
Sorry, could you repeat that one more time, please? Once we're buried, our body becomes bones and dust. Is that what you said?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
That's what I said. Okay. However, the soul lives on.
Yeah.
So when we go to, I don't know, maybe it doesn't make sense. I don't know. When we go to the Qabristan.
Yeah.
And often, I mean, we can recite all different surahs, and I know that those kinds of things will benefit the deceased.
Yeah.
However, then often people will just stand there and they will speak with the deceased, like, as in catching them up with the news, or as in I really miss you, et
Mm-hmm.
cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Is the deceased able to hear all that?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because people would have conversations with them, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I
You're
completely
talking to a
understand your.
mother who's passed away, and you're talking about, how I miss them, et cetera, et cetera. So go ahead,
Mm-hmm.
please.
Let me take your question and answer it this way. There are times when we go to even the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, who and their parents, they've undergone the physical death, right? Now, let's say the Holy Prophet's grave, who has gone to the physical death, and over there we ask for tawassul, we ask for certain things, and we try to communicate and talk to them. Such a thing is definitely possible, right? It's not the case that the deceased is entirely now disconnected with the dunya entirely, right? But the level of interaction that the deceased has is based on the existential capacity of the deceased, right?
Mhm.
Certain deceased, certain people who've gone from this apparent world into the hereafter, right? In the physical sense, right? Some of them are shuhada, salihin, the prophets, the scholars, right? Sometimes they have the capacity of even giving positive effects into the dunya. Not only can they receive information from the dunya, right, but they can even give positive effects back, right? So they can, when we go to the graves of our scholars, sometimes we can ask by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by tawassul of these people, these pious saints, can you help bless me, please? Let's say with a child or so on and so forth, right? And such a tawassul is possible, right? The existential capacity of this great scholar, this saint in Islam, was is such that basically by means of his existence, Allah does grant me the blessing that I'm looking for, and so on and so forth, right? Or at certain times, a particular scholar or a particular noble person might come into my dream, or come visit me or talk to me in that realm of dream. I might see my parents, my siblings, and so on and so forth, who might have passed away. In some capacity, certain people who pass away based on their existential um, uh, elevation, really, right? They're given the allowance to interact. But certain people, most people rather, right, that capacity might not exist. And that capacity also is gradational in nature,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So again, this is not something that is externally given to a person. It's what they've manifested by their own actions in their 24 hours.
Mhm.
If they led their 24 hours implementing the deen to the best of their capacities, right, then they're like the saints whom we can communicate with, and by means of their elevation, we can ask Allah to help us as well, right? Uh, uh,
Okay.
I hope I answered your question there.
Very much so. But now I'm going to ask you something related to that. Is there a special, excuse me, a special status that parents, many people will go to the grave of their parent and ask them that if you do the tawassul of ask Allah to do like for the tawassul of their parents. Is
Mhm.
there a different thing for the parents to the child?
Yeah, so the relationship that a person has towards their parents, in particular their mother, is extremely important. So what's going on, Ray? Let's open this up a little bit. When let's say somebody's mother has passed away, and now they're going to the graveyard, and they're going to the grave of their mother, and they're remembering their mother, and they, let's say, do Surah Fatiha for their mother, or they give sadaqah for their mother, or just by arriving in that place, they're kind of um, uh, they're doing ikram of their mother, right? They're kind of paying their respects, their due respects to their mother. This action in of itself is a beloved action in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So this particular action existentially causes a lot of issues and problems in the person who commits this action to go away. Those existential issues might decrease if I go and visit, let's say the grave of my mother, and so on and so forth. And the condition is not here that this mother of mine has to be even like, somebody who is, of the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or super pious, and so on and so forth, right? Rather, because a son is now going and with this understanding that Allah likes this particular ikram, He likes the display of respect and love towards our parents, right? I go and I visit that particular grave, and I visit the grave of my mom, let's say, right? May Allah bless her with a long life. I'm in fact obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if I'm doing this with this particular intent and attention there, right, I'm performing a deed that has effects on not only myself, but because my mother raised me to have this attention towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it also blesses her too.
Mhm.
Okay.
Then, but can I do her tawassul?
Sorry, can you do your
Can I
tawassul?
do her tawassul?
So you can say, for example, Allah, for the sake of this, my mother who gave me the love of the Ahlul Bayt, who gave me and taught me that I can actually, live this deen, and taught me about yourself and how to be a good Muslim and a good mu'min. For the sake of this particular person, can you take rid of the problems that I might be facing right now, and so on and so forth. You can do that. But asking from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the sake of my parents, right, and for the sake of mu'mineen, and for the sake of the scholars and the pious people, and so on and so forth, this is good. This is something that you can do tawassul towards, right? And the apex of tawassul is done by means of the Ahlul Bayt. Meaning that they are the best and the highest form of the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So they embodied the deen entirely. So it's not that I can't do tawassul of others. At whatever capacity others embodied the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they have that much value, right? So if I go to the qabristan of mu'mineen itself, just being in the qabristan of the mu'mineen, there's a riwayah from Asbaq ibn Nabata. He says that I was walking with Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, and we're traveling across the graveyards of the mu'mineen. And then the Imam Ali salam recites a small ziyarat Ahl Qubur it's called. And he said that I heard from the Holy Prophet, whoever recites this ziyarah whilst walking around the graves of the mu'mineen, Allah will forgive 50 years of his sins. And Imam Ali asked the Holy Prophet, what if this person doesn't have 50 years of sins? And the Holy Prophet responds in saying that Allah will forgive from his parents and his siblings, and from the ummah of the Holy Prophet itself, 50 years of sins. Right? So just having this capacity of iman and believing and living our deen within the 24 hours, at whatever capacity you manifest that's a positive thing, right? And it has effects like this effect in that particular hadith that I just quoted has. Where 50 years worth of sins are elevated from a person whilst they're maintaining this relationship of religious brotherhood amongst one another, even after one has passed away. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you, yes, very much so.
I'm at your service. Does anybody have any other questions? We have about 2 minutes left.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Regretfully, I missed attending major part of this session tonight.
Okay.
I wonder if you would be sharing recording.
So
I'd appreciate if you do.
So this particular session is being recorded on the cloud at the moment. Inshallah, customarily for Ali classes, recordings are on their website, and I think they will be there as well. I don't know how long it will take. And in terms of my post-session communications, I often post passages to read, which summarize things that we've talked about, at least the major.
So will we get them in the email? Because this is a registered session, right? So I don't know, I'm not sure whether the website would have the recordings of registered sessions, because these are specifically for registered as far as my information goes.
Sure. So I'll respond an email to you and all the people that are in this particular class regarding that, right? And so just like the first session, you got 2 pieces of information from me, right? You got the PowerPoint slides in PDF form, and you got 3 passages to read in one Word doc, correct?
Right. think yes, but I'm not sure. I may have missed even. I don't remember it because I don't remember. Memory has been playing tricks also of late. That is why I missed the class tonight also. Yeah, and I have a question also. That it's said that there are two angels sitting on your shoulders, one recording good deeds and one recording the not so good deeds. And Allah also has placed this concept of dua. In fact, like last time, if I can put up 2-3 questions, I don't know, you'd have time to ponder on it, or others will bear with me or not. But one question that I've always had it, that has Allah, like, created this cause and effect world, and so placed us in this and given us somewhat free will to do what, with the hidayah, he has placed us to do whatever we deem right and whatever wherever we may err, but given us that choice, and he is like kind of folded his hands and he'd be like watching and said that everything will be judged when you arrive at the D-Day. But then that challenges the concept of dua, because you want to erase your mistakes and all if you happen to regret and all. So that brings me to my original question of these two angels recording the daily events. So like, what are the criteria of them noting, like, they are angels, they are supposed to be like our monitors, but are they above us in judging us that, yeah, this is right and this is wrong? Are they the judges to decide our actions is right? And so they note down the one person notes down that, yeah, this is right. The other person takes it, no, this is wrong, so I'll note it as wrong. And what is there, who gives them the discretion? Like, there are billions of people having gone through history also and presently also. So like, does Allah direct each and every soul's two angels? Okay, remove this one's, add 10 brownie points to this one's account, add these many mistakes he has made, so give him 10 minus points and all. Like, what is the criterion of for the D-Day eventually, and for this world also, as regards the concept of dua?
Yeah. So hopefully when you get the recording for this session, you'll see that we talked about this concept of how things work in the barzakh, in the hereafter. And it's not like you're going to be asked questions verbally and responding verbally. And it's not like the recording of these actions that you're doing is like with a pen and paper and they're
that's a difference. That would be a different scenario probably on the D-Day. I'm talking about the interim period from the birth to the death to this world's existence, and it's a recording of actions and not, which will have repercussions there, of course.
Exactly how in the example of a person working out for 3 months, right? Their daily activity was kind of imprinted into their existence, right? And then the amalgamation of that after 3 months, when they lifted up the mirror, they're like, oh, I'm obese. So that obesity wasn't imprinted in a day, rather gradationally imprinted in that person's existence as he neglected workout sessions and neglected his diet and so on and so forth, right? In a very similar manner, right? We're existentially stamping onto our soul, really, by means of our actions, the results of our actions. And this is in essence the recordings of the deeds. And we covered this particular portion in certain aspects, in certain capacities, last session as well as this session. In terms of your other question about there being a contradiction of sorts in us committing actions and Allah causing a cause and effect world, and then this idea of dua. Well, the dua itself is a cause that Allah has placed in the world, right? There really isn't a contradiction. It's like Allah saying, listen, I am giving you the capacity to ask me and to ask the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam to now take away from those spiritual wounds, really, that you've inflicted upon yourself by means of your ill habits or whatever the case may be, right? And then the effect of the dua is based on the cause. So if the dua is asked in a very sincere manner, if it's asked in a manner which basically doesn't defy the intellectual possibility, like for example, a person can't say, Allah, I wish that, all my enemies, they turn to dust. Right away. Hold 1 second. The existential realities of this world right now, right? They're very different to this particular dua. This dua isn't formed from understanding and logic and reasoning and so on and so forth, right? It might because of certain limitations within the dua itself, it might not manifest in this dunya, this particular dua, right? But Allah has caused in this realm of cause and effect, He has caused and created for us one such cause, and which is this means of dua. And just as how this cause is, how we manifest this dua into existence, the same effect of a similar magnitude will come out, right? So if I'm half-heartedly asking for a dua, a specific dua, or I'm just reading dua kumal just as like I'm reading a newspaper, right? Then the effect of that particular dua, is in line with the mode of asking that particular dua, right? Another time I'm reciting a particular dua or reading a particular dua while actually living it in my 24 hours, right? Not only am I asking Allah for forgiveness by my tongue, I'm actually going after making sure that I don't sin, and if I've made a mistake, I try to fix that. But by creating that higher magnitude cause in that particular dua, I'm creating and allowing for that higher level magnitude of effect to take place as well. Okay, so this, hopefully I've answered your question. This concludes the session for today. If you guys have more questions and would like them to be answered, please feel free to email me. You should all have my email address, and I'm more than happy to take emails, inshallah.
Sorry, can I ask a quick question?
I was told to be very strict on time, and 9:30 right now. Last time I had gotten into trouble by going significantly over the time. If you feel that your question, you can send it to me via email. I'll make sure to answer it. Is that okay?
Sure.
Thank you so much. I really am sorry about that. Inshallah, next time I'll give more time for question and answering at the end of the session.